I don't know what to say, man. I mean, do a better job. Like, your frame sucks. Nobody takes the arguments you're making seriously.
Multi-billion-dollar surveillance and prison and jail industries, etc., and the police have so much power that whenever there is a political fight over how to make those systems function better, they win those battles.
When Alec and you talk about defunding the police, but you say, oh, we want to do stuff about white-collar crime, but oh, we want these alternative ways to do public safety, that's not defunding the police. It just isn't.
Clinton, Bush 1, Obama, they actually took enormous resources away from white-collar investigations.
Why not just ditch it and go to reform the police?
They refuse to engage with the empirical evidence around this, and then they always pivot to the second point that Lee is making. I think you said it's not popular.
This is gaslighting. This whole thing is gaslighting. And you just fundamentally don't respect human nature. Like, that's the problem here.
I would love to hear you, Matt, respond to Alec's point that, frankly, this stuff is popular.
So, do you want to eliminate all police and jails?
I'm here with Matt Stoller, returning to the podcast. You know him, you love him. I refer to him as the king of anti-monopoly discourse. He is the research director at the American Economic Liberties Project. Welcome back, Matt.
Thank you. I'm feeling cranky.
Oh, so you're not playing against type today, I see. You're in peak form. Okay, I know you're getting over. You're having.
Just so you know, I have the flu. I am contagious through the podcast. So if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to get the flu, and I'm sorry. Just
Matt Stoller defying science and biology to infect us.
You might as well listen to it already because you just got the flu, so it's too late.
All right. And also returning to the podcast as a bad faith guest all-star, Alec Karakatsanis. You know him as a civil rights lawyer and author of Propaganda, which is excellent. People should buy it and read it if you haven't done so already. He's also the founder of the Civil Rights Corp. I guess you don't call it Core. Sorry, I have these notes written here a little all over the place. And also a police and prison abolitionist. So let's talk about it. My feeling is that I've wanted to get you two lads together for a long time because you are two folks that I find to be irreplaceable resources to better understand your respective fields. There are discrete areas where there's overlapping between the two of you. And at these junctures and in other places, there has been some disagreement between the two of you that has played itself out on Al Gore's internet, on Elon Musk's Twitter. And it has caused me a great deal of pain and anxiety because of how much I like, respect, and learn from each of you respectively. Now, cards on the table, I am inclined to agree with Alec on the broad issue of criminal justice. That being said, I want to act as a moderator and impartial, not because I don't have a perspective, but because I genuinely like you both so much, and I am deeply invested in there being some kind of understanding, if not pure agreement at the end of this conversation. So I want to start by asking you, Matt, what you think the contours of your disagreement with Alec are.
Well, I think you have too many syllables in your last name. I just want to start.
It's a big problem.
It is.
When I was a kid, they said, Alec Karaka can't stand you. And I'm still recovering from that.
It's like, honestly, Ellis Island or wherever you came, and they should have taken care of that. They should have been like, Alec Smith. All right. You're, I'm just letting you know that right now.
I just go by Alec usually, I'm just going to drop the last name. People know me as Alec.
But it is very fun to say.
Karakatsana. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That was great. That was great. You did it well.
I started strong, but I just lacked follow through. Look, I'm not a criminal justice expert in terms of the blue collar crime, call it that, street crime. I think about crime in the C-suites, which is, more dangerous in my view, but I also have a general, I'm not going to speak to the specific disagreements because I don't totally know what they are. But my general view, which sometimes puts me on the left, sometimes puts me on the right, is that my fear and my view of what makes a good society is a society in which we can be free and independent from arbitrary coercion, right? That's the gist of it. And so I think about monopoly because monopoly is a good way to understand the problem of distant financiers engaging in arbitrary and coercive behavior against otherwise free people and undermining what should be a free society. But there are other aspects, there are other ways of engaging in coercive and arbitrary behavior. The state can do it. I think we see a lot of that. I think you can see, criminal gangs can do it. I think there's lots of ways that people can be arbitrarily coerced. And we have built, the idea of America is to build a government that we come together as people to protect each other and prevent that from either domestic or foreign entities. Now, what I've seen when I think about this problem and write about this problem is that, there's what you need is some state capacity and some private litigant capacity to go after the bad guys, right? And when I think about the bad guys, I'm thinking about people who monopolize, people who use spreadsheets to murder people instead of guns or whatever. And you need capacity to do that. We don't have a lot of capacity to do that. And there's constant attacks on the funding of those white collar police, whether it's IRS, antitrust enforcers, FTC, whatever. And there is a de-emphasis on the connection between that and the violence that we see all over the place. So, when the guy who was running the bailout, the main bailout cop, Neil Barofsky in 2009, he asked for his representatives or for his people to carry guns. And they got the authorization from Congress, but there was like a lot of laughter, like white collar people might be violent. That's crazy, right? There is violence there, but the attack on the attempt to police, on the police powers of the state, is fundamentally a libertarian attack. Now, when you flip it, right? When I saw the defund the police argument, right, which took kind of a set of reform-minded people and flipped them to what I think of as a libertarian frame, I thought was really foolish because it was an attempt to say we don't care about public safety, or we're not going to have a government, and as opposed to we're going to fix our government. And what we said in the Declaration of Independence, which is governments are instituted among men to preserve these rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sorry, Brianna, it's not, I didn't write it. Actually, I totally wrote it, and it was personally directed at you, just to annoy you.
I bet.
The long game. I was playing for this podcast. But that's generally that is, if you can't attack the idea of the state in one capacity and not have that extend everywhere. So the Koch brothers, for example, got very involved in criminal justice reform, not because you could say that maybe they cared about the poor or the attack on the poor, but really what they were trying to do was allow Koch Industries to do whatever it wanted without any kind of interference from the state. So when I'm looking at the problem, I think we have a problem of oligarchy. And the problem of oligarchy is when oligarchs are more powerful than the rule of law itself. And right now, that's the situation that we're in. I didn't like the defund the police frame because I thought it was an attack on the state as opposed to an attempt to reform the state. And that's, I think, maybe that's where, Alec and I got into a tiff online.
All right, Alec, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Unlike Matt, I'm feeling incredibly good about the world today, not cranky at all. I think there's just so many reasons to be optimistic about our collective future, a future free from coercion, I guess, which we both agree on.
Arbitrary coercion. Coercion is,
Well,
so you gotta coerce sometimes,
Maybe we have some interesting things to discuss then about what kinds of coercion should count, et cetera. Maybe we can get into that.
Yeah.
I think, for me, I just want to say right off the top, so Matt and I don't really know each other. And I think, I'm a reader of his work. I think he's been following some of my stuff. And I think we largely agree on a lot of stuff. And there have been a couple of disagreements, but I think it's important to just start with a shared grounding that I think we both are coming from a place where we want a society where human beings are safe and can flourish and can determine the course of their own lives. And we maybe have some strategic and tactical and maybe even some empirical differences of opinion that I think we should get into today. But just starting from like that place where I think we're coming to like it's not like we're coming from the far right or something, or we both, I mean, we both have a tremendous amount of disdain for how the political establishment in both of the primary political parties and many of the online kind of corporate media pundits talk about all of these issues. And I just been I've learned a lot about monopolies from Matt, from people like David Dayen, from others who are thinking and writing a lot about antitrust. And I actually don't view any of that work that I've seen, at least, as inconsistent with my own project as a civil rights lawyer and as someone who has spent their career trying to reduce the size and power of what I call the punishment bureaucracy. I don't use the term criminal justice system because I don't want to give anybody the idea that either its purpose or its effect is to do justice. I think it's doing something else. And I think I'm going to get into this in a second, but I think at a really high level of generality, the difference I have of opinion with Matt maybe in what he just said is that I see throughout the course of US history, from sort of the slave patrols throughout the South to the way that police were used by large trusts and corporate entities to crush striking workers. I see the history of policing in the United States as actually, they are a tool of violence that has time and again, from the women's suffrage movement to anti-war movements to the civil rights movement to LGBTQ movements to the environmental movement to economic justice movements, you name it. In every progressive egalitarian social movement in US history has been infiltrated and crushed by the policing bureaucracy. And the police have always been a tool of those oligarchs. Because in any given society, whatever country you're in, whether you're in Russia or China or Brazil or England or France or the United States or any of these countries, the policing bureaucracy, the court system, the prison system, they are always used by the people who have power in that society. And they tend to serve the interests of people who have power in a society. So if you have a society that is really unequal, it has really unequal distributions of wealth and power, whether those are spread along racial or gender lines or whatever it may be, the police are going to enforce those distributions of wealth and power. So I think the second thing I want to say before I get into some of the details is I actually don't view this necessarily as a disagreement between me and Matt. I think the reason that I want to have this conversation is I see so many people on the sort of progressive left, or maybe let's call it like a potential anti-fascist coalition, who I think share certain values and want to see certain measures of equality and democratic participation in society, et cetera, et cetera. I see a lot of those people who, in my view, have insufficient understanding of how the aggregations of wealth that really control our society to a large degree, they control our political system, our media ecosystem, et cetera, are actually and always have been historically linked with the policing and punishment and surveillance and prison bureaucracies. And whether it's the policing of people to accomplish gentrification by real estate developers, or the 500 Chicago police undercover officers at the height of the civil rights movement, right? Just in that one city alone, that were destroying the burgeoning multiracial working class political movement exemplified by Fred Hampton and others, right? So all of these times throughout history, like all of these things that this anti-fascist coalition says that it wants, whether it's universal health care or better housing for everybody or early childhood education, the police have actually opposed these reforms and actually crushed the social movements that are advocating them throughout history. So even before this era of what we call mass incarceration, which is kind of what I want to get into now, right? So what we've seen in the last 50 years is the expansion of the repressive bureaucracy of the state to degrees that have been like heretofore unknown in world history. To the point where right now, as we're having this conversation, the United States is putting all human beings in cages at 5 to 10 times what other countries are doing around the world. That's the rate, right? 5 or 6 times its own steady historical average. Something happened in the late 70s and early 80s that set us on this path of unprecedented incarceration to the point where right now we're putting black people in jail at 6 times South Africa at the height of apartheid. So something changed. It wasn't that Americans got more evil or more dangerous. We made policy decisions that increased the capacity of the state to intervene in people's lives, to separate tens of millions of people from their children, to surveil the communications of hundreds of millions of people, to do just incredible violence to the ability of people to live their lives. And I've spent my career trying to understand that and fight against it. And I think that the mass incarceration bureaucracy, one area where Matt and I think, have a lot to talk about, and I wrote about this in my first book, Usual Cruelty, is the mass incarceration bureaucracy represents another shift. In order to accomplish it at key moments, Reagan, Clinton, Bush 1, Obama, they actually took enormous resources away from white-collar investigations. They decimated the antitrust and IRS investigation and prosecutorial bureaucracy. They shifted all of that to what they called drug enforcement, to the point where by 2015 in the United States, there were more arrests for marijuana possession than for all violent crime combined. That's what the system was prioritizing. And one of the most important things that I've learned in my work, and I think I've seen Matt do really great stuff on this too, is there's one of the defining features of our mass incarceration world is that the police are only prosecuting some crimes against some people some of the time. So they call themselves law enforcement because they want us to think it's objective and neutral, but in reality, they're very focused, and they're actually reducing the number of people whose job it is to even look for corporate crime, white collar crime, et cetera. And they're arraying that apparatus against the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society. And the last thing I'll say, Brianna, before I want you to kind of jump in and lead the discussion, is to me, let's set aside the idea of whether you think prosecuting corporate and white collar crime is problematic or something from like an abolitionist perspective. That's not really my view, by the way. But like, I think that shift of resources away from prosecuting the most powerful people in our society for all of the myriad ways in which they do violence to the most vulnerable people in our society, and do predatory acts like extracting their wealth and et cetera, at huge scale. We're talking about scale that is like 100 times all other property crime combined is the sort of scope of white collar crime if you look at like FBI estimates. Setting aside like whether that stuff should be prosecuted in a criminal system that looks like what it does today, the fact that those people who call themselves law enforcement, who claim that they are concerned about public safety, have chosen to focus their energy on the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society and not on the crimes of the powerful is indicative of the purpose and function of those systems. And so I think what I see the defund movement as, we can also get into sort of some of the slogans and some of the marketing of that movement and whatever, but I see that movement as just a basic attempt to say, wait a second, as it stands, this bureaucracy is arrayed against the most vulnerable people in our society. We should reduce its size and power and shift some of its focuses. And that may be kind of a good jumping off point, but I'll let you jump in, Brianna, and you can sort of correct some of my rambling.
That was great, Alec. So one, I'm glad that you said that this isn't just about a disagreement between you two, because it is a broader schism that's happened among the left. Most recently, to make it a little topical, Zohran Mamdani listed his staffing choices in a number of contexts. There's been some hubbub about some choices on the housing side and some celebration on the criminal justice side among many leftists because Alex Vitale, who's been on the show, I think, with you, Alec, at the same time, is one of the folks listed. But of course, there are some in the left sphere, like Li Fang, who disagree with this, who has been critical of defund and abolitionism generally speaking. He tweeted, "Huge step backward from Amdani. This guy wants to defund and abolish policing. You can find him wherever prep school lefties congregate. Zero working class New Yorkers adhere to these ideas." And so I just read the lead tweet because I do think it is reflective of an attitude that is not uncommon among some folks in our left ecosystem. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, Matt, but that is why this conversation is important. So I want to pick up on a couple of threads and put the question to Matt. You started us off by saying a number of things that I agree with and that I think Alec would agree with, which is to say there is a disproportionate focus or rather there is not sufficient focus on policing, or whatever you want to call it, accountability for folks who do big white collar crimes. I hear Alec saying that he agrees with that, and that when you hear defund, you hear a sort of a libertarian interest in further undermining the ability of the state to go after white collar criminals. I think we both heard Alec say,
no, not just white collar criminals. Like,
okay, then all criminals.
Public safety, like all criminals, yeah.
So Alec also, I noticed, started by saying that he thinks that you both agree on the public safety point. And I know that the argument that's made by Lee and others, and I think yourself, Matt, is that defund necessarily requires there to be less public safety, a point that I know Alec has pushed back against a lot. So I think that might be a good place for us to dig in, since I do read a lot of agreement here, broadly speaking, although I would maybe push back against the framing of it as libertarian. If we want to make sure that police are going after crime not on the basis of protecting property interests of the elites, and instead addressing the bulk, frankly, of theft that is happening at the corporate level, and basically enforcing a sort of equality and freedom for most of us, then that is not the police system that we have. It might be something different that you may or may not want to call the police going forward. But it feels to me like a lot of the tension around abolitionism and defund is that people are not imagining, the defund movement doesn't imagine that nothing exists in the void of the police, but that there are new systems that better accommodate the problems that we agree on. Well, what do you say to that, Matt?
So first of all, I thanks for this discussion. And Alec, I agree. The reason I was disagreeing with you isn't because I think this disagreement has nothing to do with you, the two of us. I think it actually reflects a larger ideological divide. And I think there really is disagreement here. So you made essentially 2 points. One of them was there was a pivot in the late 70s, early 80s that made the carceral system far more punitive and destructive than it was, both in terms of, and unequal, both in terms of going after the poor, but also enabling the sort of extractive class to extract more. Is that a fair characterization of one of your points? I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that
I'm not. I just get yes or no. I'm not trying to have. I want to, because I want to get to.
Go ahead. I mean, I don't want to exactly like that, but yeah, you could go on. Yeah.
Okay. So the other point, and I think this is where the disagreement is that police have always been destructive in every society. They are always destructive. They are always used by, well, you called it people in power in every society. And that, and I think there's like a ... therefore, right? Which I'm not sure what comes next, because it's like, okay, so like societies, and every human society that's ever existed has always used punishment and coercion ever. So, to just say, well, police have always been involved in punishment and coercion by people in power is a tautology. And it precludes, and this is where I think we disagree. If you're saying, well, it's always being used by those in power, the subtle, I think, distinction here is that you're assuming that the public itself cannot be in power. Like, there's a subtle and I think noxious disbelief in the possibility of democracy itself going on here, right? And I think, first of all, I don't think it's true. I think it's like crazy history to say that the police have always been on the side of like the rich bad guys. Like, that's just silly.
Well, when haven't
before bureaucratic policing, I can pretty much guarantee you would not like what was there were a lot of policing techniques that were far, far, far worse. Direct oligarchical control of violent forms. I mean, you would not like the policing in Rome, for example. That was like some really evil shit. So the idea that we have a state project, right, where you have due process and checks and balances, even if they don't work, right? Even if they need to be fixed. The idea that you have some sort of bureaucratic process is a huge, huge innovation that took a lot of bloodshed and effort. And I think it's just kind of like this romantic thing on the left where people think, oh, violence is always bad towards the poor. It's always that the state is always engaging in violence. It's always terrible. It's like, well, there was a civil war and there was a huge Union army that engaged in massive amounts of violence, horrible, destructive stuff to get rid of slavery. And you have to concede that violence is a thing and it's just going to happen. Coercion is a thing. It's just going to happen. To have a society, to have public safety, that is a thing that has to happen. And so the question is how it's going to happen. And what I find from the left here is this idea that we can't trust anything that's ever happened before because it's all been, and I'm not making this is what Alec just said, it's all been always used by the people in power, and the people in power can't be the public because obviously that's that you're not saying that people, the broad public, like is choosing this. It has to be some sort of malevolent conspiracy. And I just think that that's a very dangerous anti-democratic view of how to run the world. And it is libertarian, or it is romantic, or however you want to put it. It's not functional and it's not popular. And that's why it's not popular. Like what Lee said isn't, I mean, I agree with that, but like the reason working class people, the reason everyone is like defund the police is stupid is because we need public safety. And that's how we achieve public safety. And like, I'm sorry, but that's just the thing.
Everyone isn't like defund the police is stupid. I mostly have
no, defund the police is a bad idea.
Wait a minute, Matt. Let me just say this.
It is a terrible idea.
I have not had a single person other than a leftist on this show or like a liberal inveigh against the idea of defund. And universally, just like you're saying right now, Matt, the reason is because you believe there to be a public safety trade-off. Alec Karakatsanis, who has
that isn't the reason. It's not the reason that I think there's a public safety trade-off.
No. You just said there would be a public safety trade-off. You think that people want police, people want to be safe, that alternate forms of policing, like in ancient Rome,
no, because defund. So okay. There's all this jumping around. There's all this jump.
Okay, let's listen. Do you not think that defunding will? Do you think that defund would lower or increase public safety?
I don't think that when people say, so when Alec and you talk about defunding the police, but you say, oh, we want to do stuff about white collar crime, but oh, we want these alternative ways to do public safety. Like, that's not defunding the police. It just isn't. Okay, defunding the police means getting rid of the police. And you're not saying getting rid of the police. This has been my bugaboo
for a really long time. That people who maybe don't like, are curious about defund, are maybe triggered by defund, think negative thoughts about defund, at 0 points in time, especially leftists I hold to the higher standard, at 0 point in time seem to have been asking, well, let me find out what they're actually saying. Let me listen to someone who is a defund advocate like Alex Vitale or Alec Karakatsanis, who's sitting here right now, who would very clearly say, I'm
not interested in hearing what somebody means by what they say. Defund the police has a very clear meaning. Abolitionist has a very clear meaning. I don't need to hear, defund the police doesn't mean defund the police. Don't say it if you don't mean it.
I'm going to let you back in here, Alec, in a second. But I want to maybe reason by.
I'm getting annoyed because you're gaslighting me. This is gaslighting. This whole thing is gaslighting.
Just for a second, Matt. I agreed with the tweet that you did yesterday at some point. We were talking about this. David Sirota is sort of losing his mind over the fact that James Carville, understandably, by the way, I'm Team Sirota, but that James Carville and all of these centrists have started to say it's the economy stupid, start to validate sort of, if you want to call it the Zoran or the Bernie approach to economic populism as a way to put together a coalition that can push back against Trump and fascism, et cetera. And there was a bit of an exchange about whether or not we should be like, okay, it's annoying, but we've got to pat Carville on the head and welcome him in the tent because it ultimately is a good thing. And you say, no, this is a mistake. These people aren't acting in good faith here. Let me just redirect your tweet. You say, no, it's not fine. The corporatists are lying and will immediately knife anyone who tries to address oligarchy while in power. They need to be pushed out of the coalition. And I've responded to you saying I strongly agree. Now, in that context, as you're thinking about corporatists and what's motivating them, to me, I read your tweet as having a structural understanding of the fact that the purpose of these people, the purpose of their agenda, the reason they're in power in the first place is to advance a corporatist agenda. And whatever is publicly popular to say right now that they might be saying in order to regain credibility in the wake of the Democrats' loss last year and all of that should not be trusted because you have a structural understanding of what's going on. And when I listen to Alec talking about the history of policing, to me, it's not him saying tautologically, because everything once was this way, it will always be that way in the future. And I don't hear him saying that he has a lack of confidence in democracy. I hear him saying that he understands that at least modern policing, I can't speak to ancient Rome and I can't even really speak to the history of American policing because I'm no expert, but that at least the contemporary police, especially since the Reagan era, as he describes it, and the corporatization of the police and the policing bureaucracy, is designed to be oppressive to poor and working class people, to crush any movements that would try to gain economic equality, to protect the property interests of the elites, and to do nothing to hold people accountable in your realm.
Can I just give like a really short like story? Okay, so one day, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, I was driving in LA and I was texting and I ran over. I drove across a crosswalk and I shouldn't have, and a cop pulled me over and gave me a ticket. And I was like, I'm glad he did that because I could have killed someone, right? Because I was texting while driving, and I stopped texting and driving. And I don't know. I don't think that that's like protecting the property interests of the elite. Or I feel like that was a good thing. And I just don't see that fitting in anywhere into this framework. Like,
what do you say to that? Does defund the police mean no more traffic police?
No, I'm not taking, you just made it, you characterize the police as this whole sort of narrative of like, they are doing all of these bad things. And you're leaving out the fact that a lot of what they do is pull over middle-aged men who are texting and driving so that they don't kill children in crosswalks. That's not a bad thing. You have to.
Do corporatists?
The point is you have to fit that in.
The point is that that's not a bad thing. But do corporatists also say, well, we created these new jobs, this data processing center that I'm establishing outside of Mobile, Alabama, is gonna employ some people in the state. There might be even more sincere, good downstream effects from certain tax credits, trickle down economics. There are things that one could point to that are good on the margins. But can we access the good aspects of a system without reinforcing the bad aspects? And can we acknowledge that sometimes the good things that we're sold on are a cover for the much larger and pernicious project? And so I want Alec to respond more directly since he's the expert here. How do you take on arguments about people who are genuinely afraid of public safety? Let's say people are calling in for domestic violence, real crimes that are happening, murders, rapes, etc., and they fear about what's going to happen in the absence of police, or even these more ministerial traffic violations, parking. How do we run our society if we don't have something called the police?
I have a lot to say about what's been said since I last spoke. I'll just try to run down the points in starting with this traffic idea, because I think it's a great example, actually. So actually, the police, we have very, very unsafe streets, sidewalks, etc. We have way more traffic fatalities and injuries than a reasonable society should have. And in fact, the police make it worse. And many of the proposals that have been put forward actually involve not abandoning traffic enforcement. The people that are interested in reducing the power of the policing bureaucracy are not saying we shouldn't have traffic laws or we shouldn't enforce traffic laws. They're pointing to empirical evidence that the way to better traffic safety is actually not through police. I have a nice example in my book about Bogota, Colombia, and they actually decided to get rid of the the police enforcement of traffic, and they used mimes that stood there and they mocked people whenever they violated traffic rules, and they actually saw a huge decrease in traffic fatalities. But that's kind of a funny example. But what we know about traffic is that it's actually things like the design of the roads, the use of single person cars, all kinds of other patterns with respect to alcohol and distraction, et cetera. It's actually not the case that armed government agents like police are necessary at all to engage in public policies that dramatically reduce traffic fatalities. So I think it's just a mistake to say that, well, when you're defending the project of the contemporary policing, to point to traffic is kind of like, well, that's a tiny portion of what they do. We could remove it from the police and still have traffic enforcement, right? And we could focus on other policies, but it's actually not what people are talking about when you get into the specifics of the defund movement, or people like me who have worked in their career to reduce the size and power of government oppression and repression. We're not talking about traffic. And so I think we can kind of put to one side that, like, yeah, occasionally enforcing traffic laws and people are texting while driving is really important. But that's not what we're talking about with respect to the police. Let me just say something about Li Fong and sort of this broader debate, because I actually think there's a really big empirical dispute that maybe you share with Lee. It sounds like kind of you do, like Brianna was saying, some implicit in your discussion is that it sounds like you think that reducing the size and power of police and prosecutors and prisons in our society would negatively impact public safety. If you don't think that, that's great. Then I think we're on the same page there. But to the extent Li Fong clearly thinks that, I think one of my favorite sections in my propaganda book is about Lee. I mean, he is kind of like a cartoon character. His public statements on this issue are so devoid of rational thinking and evidence as to be kind of like just sort of like almost parodies or caricatures of what a MSNBC standard pundit might say. I mean, it's really interesting.
I like and respect Lee a lot, so
I know. Let's.
I'm sure you do.
I have had a screaming match with him in a steakhouse, but I do like Lee.
I don't know Lee. I've actually been a fan of some of his investigative reporting. I don't know him at all, but his commentary on this issue, like his statement yesterday that zero working class people. I mean, it's. But anyway, the core, I think, kind of flat Earth thinking that is animating a lot of Lee's commentary on this issue is he seems to think that reducing the size and power of the police, prosecution, and prison bureaucracy would hurt public safety. That is like climate science denial. We know from empirical evidence from this country and from many, many other countries that the things that are most determinant of the levels of interpersonal harm in any given society, so the amount that people harm each other, has nothing to do with little tweaks in the punishment bureaucracy. It has literally nothing to do with whether there are 14 cops on this beat or 11, or whether this prosecutor who online people like Lee are criticizing progressive prosecutors because they accept maybe 66% of the cases police bring them instead of 73% of their predecessor, or the punishment for this offense is 11 years instead of 8 years. These things have zero effect on the levels of interpersonal harm in a society. The things that determine how much people are harming each other, so public safety in any given society, and this is like the level of solidity of these findings is like climate change science, okay? The things that determine how much we hurt each other in society.
There's more and more climate deniers every day.
Well, that's true. But I don't think Lee is a climate science denier. And I don't think Matt is, right? I don't think the people we're talking to on this show who might have misconceptions about the police because of how propagandized they are. And I have all the evidence in the book. But the things that actually determine how safe we are things like how unequal is the society? How much poverty is there? How much access is there to healthcare? How much access is there to safe and affordable housing? Early childhood education is a huge determinant. So one of the biggest drivers of of policy drivers that we have studied in recent years in terms of the effect on crime is actually Medicaid expansion. Okay. Another huge one is levels of loneliness and isolation in any given society versus levels of like community connection. The institutional arrangements by which people are coming together. So I'm talking about a wide variety of civic and other kinds of associations, music, theater, art, programming, athletics for kids, et cetera, et cetera. These are the things. Toxic masculinity. Another big one is lead exposure in kids, which predicts future criminal behavior. So these are the things that matter. And the big lie at the core of a lot of mainstream media's reporting on crime is it unnecessarily links violence to police, prosecutors, and prisons, when those things are actually not what's determining levels of violence in any given society. And I think that's a core thing. And that's a factual disagreement that it's possible to study, and I have. And one of the interesting things that I found about Lee when I've tried to engage with, and not just Lee, but people who express this view online, they're just never engaging with these facts. They refuse to engage with the empirical evidence around this, and then they always pivot to the second point that Lee is making. And I think I heard you make too when you said something like, I don't want to misquote you, but I think you said it's not popular. Okay. So I try to talk about the evidence. A lot of the mainstream MSNBC, New York Times pundits, and for some reason Lee, who otherwise is able to see that those people are propagandists in many other realms, they pivot to this idea. Well, it's not popular, so it's not going to be good for Democrats or the left to criticize police. I am at a loss to understand that position.
And that's tautological. That's tautological because you never get to get the facts out that explain your position. People just say it's not popular, and it can never be popular because there's never a persuasion attempt by anyone on the left.
Can I just ask a question about your position?
Yeah.
So do you want to eliminate all police and jails?
I think it's a very difficult question that I don't think our society needs to get to at this juncture. I personally, if you're asking me about police as they currently look and operate and jails as they currently are, where I go in all the time, we're talking about some of the most depraved and horrific and violent and unsafe places that actually we know from the empirical evidence increase crime. If you're asking me about that, then yes. But if you're asking me if I want to eliminate accountability for when people hurt each other, no, not at all. And many societies throughout world history have had other mechanisms of punishment, other mechanisms of what I prefer to think of as accountability. And we can get into that in a second, but let me just say this. We could bracket that question. We don't have to get into that right now. We could decrease the size and power of the surveillance and police, prosecutor, and prison bureaucracy by 80%, and we could still get what the US looked like for most of the 20th century. And then we could agree to fight about that stuff, right? We could take those resources and we could use them on healthcare and housing and early childhood education. And then we could see, you know what, like for the rest of this 20%, let's figure out how might we address these kinds of really serious harms, right? So let's not even fight about like total abolition for a moment. Let's just think about like, how might we ratchet things back? Because ratcheting things back also reduces the political power because when we expanded the policing bureaucracy, a series of multi-billion-dollar corporate industries popped up at every single stage of the system, to the point where we now have we have a bail industry monopoly, multi-billion-dollar system that exists only in the US and the Philippines that determines who is separated from their kids before trial, right? We have the multi-billion-dollar prison telecom industry, which pays sheriffs around the country to end family visits in jail, which increases crime, right? And they stopped in-person visits at jails so that they could take a cut of the increased profits from phone calls. We have multi-billion-dollar companies that produce the tasers and the surveillance technology, and you could go on and on and on. The prison medical care industry is a multi-billion-dollar horrific industry. Anyway,
can I just ask a separate question? Because you said, I asked, do you want to eliminate police and jails? And you sort of said, let's bracket that question. Okay, fine. So let's bracket that question. So if we don't even need to get there, why don't you just call what you're doing reform the police?
I'm unlike a lot of people online, I'm not concerned about the labels. So like we could call anything whatever we want.
What are we arguing about then?
Well, I think a lot of the people who critique the defund movement are so focused on the labels that they're missing the forest
Yeah,
for the trees.
it
And
is
that's where I
funny
was
that
going to get to.
yeah, go ahead. I was
Well,
just saying,
I was
I never am like, let's do an episode on defund. It's never, go back and listen to all the times we've come up, this debate has come up on this podcast. I'm living my life talking about the left, and someone says, well, defund is really why we're losing. And I'm like, I'm not even saying defund. Like, it's like this thing that's stalking. It feels like the way that trans issues are treated, to be honest. No one's talking about trans people. Trans people are living their own life. And then some liberal who doesn't, frankly, want to address real problems like the ones you talk about, Matt. They don't want to talk about the corporate elite. They don't want to talk about monopoly power. They don't want to talk about any of that. So they say, well, the real thing the Democrats should pivot on is trans women in sports. Or the real thing the Dems need to talk about is defund the police. Whereas in real life, those discourses aren't being pushed forward by
Okay, so let me ask a different question. If the label doesn't matter, okay, and you just want to talk about the substance, and very obviously defund the police is getting in the way of having a clear conversation about what you actually care about, why not just ditch it and go to reform the police?
So let me just say a couple of things about this. First of all, it's getting in the way precisely because people like Lee and Democratic MSNBC pundits, etc.
You're talking to me. I agree with Lee. I agree with those MSNBC pundits.
Let me just finish my.
Don't blame it on other people. I am asking you because I agree with them.
Let me just answer your question. Then we can. Okay. I'll give you space to talk after that. So there's a very sophisticated form of propaganda that is just relentlessly refusing to have the actual conversation. We don't care about the labels, okay? The defund label was sort of created as an attempt to distinguish between two different concepts. So while the particular word doesn't matter, the concepts matter. So what's attempting in defund is try to distinguish between changes that actually make a difference and that reduce the size and power of the bureaucracy on the one hand, and reforms which have historically been proposed by the Democratic and Republican Party establishment as a sort of counterinsurgency tactic to make it seem like they're making changes, but that those changes actually increase the size and power of the punishment bureaucracy. So one of the most important aspects of my book is I walk through specific examples of how throughout U.S. history, and particularly the last 40 or 50 years, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have pushed so-called reforms, using those words, that actually make the very same problems worse. They give the police and prisons and prosecutors more and more and more power under the guise of reform. So what the defund movement was trying to do is say, enough of that. Let's focus on these structural and material conditions and focus the question on what kinds of investments is our society making in safety? Are we investing in healthcare, education, housing? Are we investing in corporate accountability, et cetera? Or are we investing in increasing the surveillance and punitive capacity and repressive capacity of the police? So that was an attempt to distinguish between different concepts. I myself, I'm not wedded to the word defund. I just want to have a conversation. And well, let me just make one. I just want to get to this really important point you raised, and that Brianna, wanted me to address, which is this idea of popular and what is popular. And because I've seen Brianna's show, she's trying to have often these like real conversations about these issues, and people constantly are saying, "Well, the Democrats are going to lose if they do that," and they've got to. You can't say these things because it's not popular. I think it's really, I have a whole chapter on the book on this question because it's such a vital dodge. It's what Matt Iglesias does. It's his basically his only thing on this issue. And it's just so wrongheaded. I have to say something about it. First of all, reducing the size and power of the police and investing those resources in systems of care is one of the most popular things in the United States. If you look at poll after poll after poll, when you ask people just, do you support defund? They say no, okay? But in the very next questions, if you ask them, if you support taking money away from police, prosecutors, and prisons and investing in social services, healthcare, housing, education, it's overwhelming supermajority support, even among Republicans. So it matters how you ask the question, and it matters what background information people are given before they answer the question. And so it's so disingenuous for people like Matt Iglesias to say that criminal justice reform or defund the police is not popular, when in all of the polls that he claims to be relying on, when you actually ask about the substance of the policy, it's extremely popular. The second point I want to make is this idea that we shouldn't do something that the evidence supports and that is morally right because it's not popular would have destroyed the civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King was leading the March on Washington, all the way up until the time of his death, he was extraordinarily unpopular with the New York Times pundit class, with mainstream American public, even with working class people, and highly controversial even in the Black community. Okay, so the idea that the civil rights movement was deeply unpopular did not make it not worth doing because of something else that's really important. What social movements do, and what when you have truth and evidence and justice on your side, the more you're able to actually talk about what you believe in. I think we saw this with Zoran Mamdani's campaign in New York. The more you actually are able to get into the specifics of what you're proposing, and you're not hung up on these superficial disputes about labels, and you're not having the conversation at the level that the corporate news wants us to have it, but you actually talk about what are you really proposing. And this is why the New York Times never talks about what leftists are actually proposing. It's because it's very popular. And when people actually see the vision, which is hopeful, optimistic, which is based on all of the evidence, which is that we can have a much safer society if we made different sorts of investments. And that's sort of my main goal with these conversations.
Okay, so just to buttonhole the popular point, I don't think it's popular because it's important for Democrats to get elected or the same or whatever reason. I think it's important to do things that are popular just because we live in a democracy, and so what the public thinks matters. And so if a lot of people agree with something, and a vast majority of people agree with something, you have to take that into account.
And what about the point about, historical minorities and other groups who are being treated poorly and who don't have popular support behind their agenda because they're literal minorities? Isn't part of the way that our government was ostensibly structured not to be so strictly majoritarian, to accommodate the reality that sometimes minority rights shouldn't be trampled by the majority? Or the bigger moral point that Alec is making, that regardless of whether or not the group affected is in the minority, that sometimes it takes time for things to become more broadly popular. And precisely because of our advocacy for unpopular things is how we get to a more just world.
Well, I mean, so are you saying that the views of the majority don't matter?
No, I'm saying it's not as strict as that. And that
I'm saying
first of all, I want to make clear, Alec's point is that it is popular. It is popular.
No, I get it. I'll address that in a second, but I'm just saying that like, if you believe in democracy, you have to accept it, warts and all, right? Like, Americans were super racist in 1905.
Well, you're talking about majoritarian democracy, which is one form of democracy, but it's not the only form of democracy. Our Constitution actually enshrines a very different form of democracy.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
A democracy that respects the civil and human rights of even the most unpopular and vulnerable groups. So I actually think this stuff is very popular, but also, like, democracy does not mean if 51% of people support an idea of mass slaughter, then you have to do that thing. It's much more complicated than that.
I mean, look, sure. You have a lot of, America contains multitudes, right? But at the end of the day, what people think matters. And if they think bad, evil shit, sorry, they do. That's what democracy means. It's like, it's not that like, that's just humanity. And like, sometimes people think evil stuff, and you can't.
But democracy might not mean that. It might mean creating the conditions where people can safely try to deepen their understanding of issues and convince other people to not think.
I know.
Wait a minute.
I know.
This point is a little bit moot. I know I've engaged in it as well. But given that we're talking about, I would love to hear you, Matt, respond to Alec's point that, frankly, this stuff is popular. And that the fact of the media,
he wants to have it both ways. He wants to have it both ways. Hang on a second. Because he said, Martin Luther King was wildly unpopular. The Civil Rights Movement was wildly unpopular. And then they won, right? And actually, that's kind of nonsense. What happened was the Civil Rights Movement had a persuasion strategy. That's why they did peaceful marches. That's why they dressed up when they went on those marches. That's why they were super, like, they had kids march into, like, sheriff holding fire hoses. Like, why would you do that? Why would you have kids do that? Unless it's a PR strategy to persuade people, which worked. And guess what? When a couple years later there were riots, the opposite happened. People got not persuaded.
Matt,
They got persuaded against it. So the point is hang on a second.
But do you agree? Okay.
It didn't work. What I'm saying is it did not work at the time. We're having this conversation like in the middle of these movements. In the middle of that movement, King was very unpopular. Though we think that it worked in real time, but the point is it was a
persuasion
I get Matt's
strategy.
point. I get Matt's point. But before we get to get to the persuasion point, do you agree then? If we agree that we are, if I take Alec's point about the popularity of the underlying issue, but let's agree that defund as a slogan isn't similarly popular. Before it seems to me we can get to a point where we agree that the more persuasion needs to be done, we'd have to agree that we think that the underlying goal is a shared one. So, Matt, are you saying that your only objection is that we're not doing a good enough job persuading on
I'm
these
saying
issues?
that you guys don't want... I'm not saying that. I'm saying you guys don't want to deal with the ugly reality of politics and power and society. And you just fundamentally don't respect human nature. Like, that's the problem here. You're always trying to say, oh, we can make it perfect, right? Like, for example, a lot of the things that you said that reduce public safety, like for example, traffic, you were like, there's so many things we could do. And you mentioned the use of single person cars as something that contributes to traffic fatalities. Yeah, okay. Well, that's kind of how America works. All right. And yeah, we could no, hang on a second. Don't besmirch me here. I will also point out that you were like, oh, early childhood education and much less inequality of wealth could completely transform public safety. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, we should totally do that. Tomorrow. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, but we also have a society today. All right. And we have problems we have to deal with today. And they're ugly problems. There are a lot of ugly things in our society that we have to deal with. And I just don't see you guys taking that seriously because I don't think you guys are bought into the idea of the nation state. I just think this is a fundamental problem on the left. You just don't want to deal with the fact that a nation state exists, that there's a lot of ugly aspects to it. There's a lot of inherently ugly aspects to human nature. There's a lot of wonderful aspects to it. And we have to figure out a way to address them all. I just don't think you're taking that seriously. And that's why I don't think anybody takes your agenda seriously. And I don't think they will take your agenda seriously.
Matt. Just help me understand. So today, in the world as it is, with the largest police bureaucracy in the history of America and potentially the history of the world, I don't know, I'm not a world historian, maybe I shouldn't say that. But today, there are a lot of really ugly things. America is one of the most violent countries in the world with respect to interpersonal violence, gun violence, all of those kinds of things. And that's in the world today, as it is. Under capitalism and under a police bureaucracy.
It's not that bad.
And it has not.
It's historically, this is a super safe
but now,
society.
Matt, you're trying to have it both ways now because you just said things are really ugly. There's
no, I said that. I didn't say things are really ugly. I said there are very ugly aspects of any society and human nature. I didn't say things are very ugly. We should be so grateful for the society that we live in.
Okay.
This is incredible that we live in this society.
Matt, was the point that you weren't just making that there are real problems that exist today that you don't think that we're not being sufficiently attendant to? Is that not the point you were just making?
No, I think that you're not. I don't think you take human nature and human society seriously. I just don't think that you do. Okay, so the human
society today, you think that we're not taking seriously the problems that are in human society today.
No, I don't think that is. I keep saying there's something different. I am saying you are wrong. No, you are not hearing what I am saying. I am saying I do not think that you take human nature and human society, the craft of building a society, seriously. I just don't think you are willing to deal with it. I feel like I just parroted that back to you, but I won't try to say it again. No, you keep inserting in there that I don't think you're taking the problem seriously. That is not what I'm saying.
Okay, society.
I think you don't have...
I don't think we're taking society
correct. I
seriously.
Don't think the project of politics is the project of crafting a society.
Right.
And I don't think you take that seriously.
My point though, Matt, is that today in the status quo, We are seeing no relationship, and I want to turn this back over to Alec because he has the statistics. There is zero relationship to addressing the real issues with human society. It's not the worst society ever. That's fine. We don't have to agree to that. But there are real problems that I agree need to be addressed. And I hear people's anxiety about those real problems when they object to defund the police. I understand where they're coming from.
Before Alec talks.
You gotta let me finish this thought. You gotta let me finish a thought occasionally as well. I think Alec's point and what he's been saying about the asymmetry of information between himself and Lee and perhaps yourself as well, is that when he reads a stat like funding the police more has no relationship to bringing down crime or increasing public safety at all. When he cites the pivot that was made in the 70s and 80s toward driving mass incarceration and increasing the size in funding of police forces and the militarization of police forces, and the fact that that has not brought down traffic accidents, has not brought down the number of people who are hit on the sidewalk by people driving on them, and all of those kinds of things, I think that's being very realpolitik about the problem and saying, even though I understand emotionally, people feel like they would be safer if there was just a cop standing on the corner. In the real world, that is not what's driving crime. And I appreciate that you have a more pessimistic view of human nature than I do. I think that that is true. I think that I have a much more optimistic view of human nature than most people do. That being said, I don't think that we have a choice, given that in the status quo, we see that things are not working. And so I would like to hear from you whether or not you actually disagree. It doesn't sound like you disagree that what Alec is saying about what brings down the crime rate is true. You just seem to have a pessimism about the ability to do anything about it in the short term.
Okay, so a lot there, and I think we're really getting somewhere. So first of all, a lot of the policy points that Alec made, this is my area of expertise. I'll take your word for it that there's a lot of interventions we could do that would reduce crime. I also, I know you do important work on, the prison industrial complex, which is like corrupt and bloated and monopolistic and horrifying in all sorts of ways. Some of the cruelest, the two most cruelest monopolies I've ever seen are the prison phone monopolies and then the dialysis monopolies for slightly different reasons. But it's just horrifying stuff. So I agree with you. And I agree with you that there's like a lot of bloated nonsense kind of across the board in these bureaucracies that's really problematic. I don't think they solve crimes enough. I think they underinvest in like key areas like white collar activity. There's a lot of violence that they could avoid, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with you on a bunch of the policy merits. The disagreement, I think, is coming from, it looks a little bit like messaging because I'm like, why are you using defund, right? Why not just say reform? But it actually, I think, goes to something deeper, which is that, the art of politics, I'm not more pessimistic on human nature than you are. I just have a view that humans are complicated creatures, we're social animals, and we can build wonderful things. And I'm probably more optimistic on the country and our society than you are. I think this is there's a lot of great things in this society. It's a wonderful society, a wonderful culture. Americans have a great spirit. I feel honored to be an American. I really do. But that, I think it took 1,000 years to get out of like just straight warlords to a nation state with legislatures, with this sort of bureaucratic functions that provide some level of recourse and protection, that like we don't have mass and like slavery anymore. We don't have, we have a written constitution. Like these are genuine achievements. And I think you have to context, like it took, a lot of warlords, and then it took, a kings centralizing power. And then those kings became autocratic. And then there were, sort of parliamentary checks, and there were lots of different wars to kind of like address these things. And there were many points when it went off the rails, and we had lived in like horrifying totalitarian societies. And we don't happen to live in one right now. We have a society that is democratic. It's kind of oligarchic. There's really some ugly aspects to it, but every society has ugly aspects to it. And I think that we have to acknowledge that that is just part of what it means to be human, is to deal with the mess that is inside of all of us. And recognizing that means recognizing that we're going to need some ugly things. And so let's figure out how to do that, and together. And I feel like the whole problem with the defund the police framework is this narrative that it's always been ugly and awful. We're always in the worst situation that we've ever been in. The police are always this malevolent conspiracy against the poor to protect, the property interests of the elite. By the way, property interests are not always of the elite. Like, it's just you could
Right,
define
but the
property in
poor's
many different
property
ways.
interests aren't being protected by the police.
Right now, yes.
The police are.
But that's a function of right now. It isn't an inherent function, right? This is where I agree with you about the 70s and 80s. Let's fix that. But if your belief is that it's always inherently this way, then I don't see what the point is of saying, but there was also a disjuncture in the 70s and 80s. It's like, you can't pick it. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. And you guys want it both ways.
Could there be a benevolent corporation, a benevolent monopoly, like a monopolist who like really tries to do the right thing, and so we shouldn't try to break it up?
Well, okay, those are different things. Could there be a benevolent monopoly?
Yeah.
Yeah, but could there be a benevolent monopoly that we shouldn't try to break up? No.
Okay, so this is do you see the analogy I'm getting at, Matt? Like, structurally, he's saying that the police form a function, and that structurally monopolies are bad for a reason, regardless of if someone could tweak the edges or if there could be a good billionaire who's running things.
Wait, structurally police are bad? No, I just don't think that's true. Did you say that?
Alec,
did I get that wrong? I could have misheard.
Yeah, no, yes, like they have been designed, the design of the police. And we're not saying that there can't be an alternate design. That's the whole point. And when Alec, I think, did such a good job of describing why it is that the defund language emerged as something separate from the reform language, it's because it is very easy to co-opt efforts to improve the police into a reformist agenda that ultimately makes the police bigger, badder, and worse. And defund is trying to make a demarcation, a hard break, and say there is something fundamental about how the system is designed that we want to break. Therefore, we have to build something new. And if you wanted to call it the police, technically you could. You could call it strawberry shortcake if you wanted to. But the point is that there has to be something fundamentally different, because the system as it exists right now is designed to protect the elites, to protect their property interests.
Okay, but we have a system. We all live in it. So, like, you can't just, like, this is a problem in monopoly. I'll just tell you, for like monopolies, right? So one of the problems with meat packers is very consolidated. But if you break them up in the wrong way, it could disrupt the flow of beef to the supermarket, right? Which would be really, really bad because people need to eat. Now, so you got to deal with the society that exists now and move it to what you want. That's the essence of reform. And what I don't understand is you're saying, well, we've got to design something fundamentally new because this system doesn't work. It's like, but we live in it. So this is why I say I don't think you take the problem of crafting a society seriously, because we live in this society. So let's just acknowledge that and try to reform and move us slowly to whatever sort of better vision you have. But like, why are we just pretending like we can just sort of snap our fingers and all the people we put in early childhood education today are going to be adults by this afternoon who won't commit crimes? Like, that's not how life works.
Let me address a lot of this, because it's been a while since I said anything, and I think there's some real progress being made in the conversation. And I want to make sure I highlight a few really important points. Number one, and I can't speak for everybody, I can just speak for myself. I care very deeply about safety. I care very deeply about the political project of making our society much more free, much more equal. It's why I have devoted my life to this work. It's why I wrote the book, Propaganda. I take it very seriously, Matt. I really do. So my main focus in my entire life is trying to figure out, how do we make safer societies? How does it actually work? And so therefore, I'm very interested in evidence and in the empirical realities of what leads to safety. I'm also really interested in this political fight, this question about, like, how do we actually win these battles? So one thing I just want to summarize and just say, just right off the top, when I see posts like the one Brianna read from Li Fang, I see an empirical evidence-based disagreement. I see him saying that reducing the size and power of the police as they're situated right now reduces public safety. I think that's wrong. I think the evidence shows that is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that I support complete and total abolition of the police and jails and prisons right now, because I think you're right, Matt. We have a society that has lots of really bad things happening in it, lots of ugliness. I don't know a single abolitionist who thinks that what we should do is just get rid of all the police, prosecutors, and prisons and keep the rest of our society looking just the way it looks. I think what abolitionists are trying to get at, and like all utopians before them, I don't think you should take it so literally. Like what they're saying is tomorrow we're just gonna by magic just get rid of these things.
Yeah.
What they're saying is let's imagine what kinds of investments our society would need to make in the short, medium, and long term so that something like the mass prison system is not conceivably necessary, because we have other ways of and this is where we get to human nature. I want to say something really important about human nature. Like, I'm not optimistic or pessimistic about human nature. I believe, based on what I've seen in my life, that human beings are capable of the most horrific and grotesque genocide. They are capable of just being complicit in systems that do horrible things to other human beings. But I also see human beings as capable of incredible love and creativity and kindness and ingenuity and technological innovation and all of these things and music and art and theater. And in the right conditions, human beings could be really amazing. In the wrong conditions, they can be really horrible. So I'm thinking about structurally, how do we create the systems in a society that push people toward what they can make with their lives and what they can do with their communities. And I'm interested in moving away from the systems that create really horrible human beings. And the prison industrial complex is a big part of actually putting human beings in a position where they're at their worst. And building some of the investments that abolitionists talk about. And let's just, I'll just be specific. Like, there's much more to this, but like theater, music, and art programs for kids instead of spending money on juvenile prisons, or healthcare access, mental health treatment, drug addiction treatment instead of cages, or like investment in permanent supportive housing for people instead of punitive and random shelters for people that don't have a place to live. I could go on and on and on, but I think when you get into the actual specifics of the policies, what you actually see from people that are called defund or abolitionists, and again, I don't like focusing on the terms, what you actually see is them wanting to say, okay, maybe in the short term, we need to preserve some of these systems. So like take Mamdani, for example. Li Fang is really upset at Mamdani. What Mamdani is saying is at very best incremental. Like he's keeping Jessica Tisch. He's just proposing that we start to build this other bureaucracy of community safety that can start handling some of these situations in a different way. That's very, very incremental. And this is something, Matt, that I think is really important for me to try to explain, not just to you, but to other people, who have your perspective, who I respect a great deal. I have spent my entire legal career working at best on things that could be called incremental. I mean, the things that I'm doing in court are at the very best incremental. There's a difference between incremental change that takes us in the right direction and incremental change that takes us in the wrong direction. And I think what a lot of the Democratic Party and Republican Party establishments have been doing is tricking the population. The population is really upset about a problem. Let's say inequality, or really upset about deaths in nursing homes, or really upset about crime, or really upset about police brutality. Okay, and the establishment sells people on these solutions, like, oh, let's privatize the elder care system. That'll fix this problem you all care about. These are snake oil salesmen. Okay, the same is true with police reform. basically all of the reforms that the Democratic Party and Republican Party have offered to fix police violence actually make those problems worse. That's my analysis of the situation. That's what I've written in my books. That's what the evidence shows. Because the monopoly, multi-billion dollar surveillance and prison and jail industries, et cetera, and the police have so much power that whenever there is a political fight over how to make those systems function better, they win those battles.
I guess I hear from local officials and sheriffs how mad they are at Axon's prices, right? So like, I don't know that, I feel like you're sort of like characterizing.
Axon, sorry, for my benefit, Axon is a prison industry. What's Axon?
They sell body
Matt?
cameras and a whole bunch of other
Okay.
stuff. Like they're monopoly. Like you've seen a lot of, the FCC Dems tried to do stuff on prison phone, like, and then they got, they did some things, and then like you see some fights over it, and so I don't think this isn't my area, but when you say what the Democrats and the Republicans are both trying to do always makes it worse, it's like when in some of the things I've seen that isn't true. So look, I have a lot of, I know the legal work that you do. I have a lot of respect for it. I understand it's incremental. And I feel like a lot of the things you're saying, a lot of the policy arguments that you're making, I haven't looked into them, but if it is what you say, like that sounds like a lot of could be part of good agendas. I just don't understand why it can't be attached to something that is a basic reformist argument that is characteristic of things in American history. I just don't get it.
Let me try to explain.
Look, I got mad at this on Twitter because I hate the term defund the police. I think it's a fundamentally toxic term. And because I don't think it's toxic because it's unpopular. I think it's toxic because it reflects a disdain for the state and for democracy itself. That's where I came from. No, you can like.
I do feel
I really do.
When I was listening to you to describe sort of the country and how long it took for us, over thousands of years of warlords and what have you to get to the democracy we live in today, I will fully acknowledge, and I'm not bringing you into this, Alec, this is just me. I will fully acknowledge, I think there's a gap between us and how much esteem we have for the current state. Not because I'm trying to be like, oh, America sucks, I'm an edgelord, but because I fundamentally am very like future and progress oriented. And I think it's a little bit, my personal orientation is that it's not only a waste of time to sit here venerating what we have so far. We can respect the journey without being kind of stuck venerating what we have so far when there's so much longer to go, and we should be focused on improving. And also because it's a very sort of, it's a technique that's frequently used by conservatives to stop progress, to say, well, aren't you grateful for America? Aren't you grateful for what we have? We're going to make America great again. I am very suspicious of that orientation personally. I'm going to say, I think it's regressive.
Well, and a lot of progressives are. And I think this is actually like a fundamental problem that the progressives have, which they had this in the 1920s, where they really felt disdainful towards the American project. But
that's not what I said. That's not what I said.
I'm not saying I'm not saying that you were a progressive from the 1920s, but I'm saying progressives in the 1920s were disdainful of the American project. And as were a bunch of others. It was a very cynical decade, and I think we're in a very cynical moment too. Why would you be respectful of this? I'm probably much older than you at this point. Actually, the age gap between us has always stayed the same. But I'm older. I've never seen policymakers in this country make good decisions. Like it's been a pretty bad. It's been a pretty bad run in our lifetimes, just in terms of the things that we've seen. So I think there's a lot of reasons to feel that the democracy, American democracy, the American project doesn't it doesn't have legitimacy. I think that's what you see in a lot of the polling.
I kind of feel differently though, because when I hear Alec talking about what he imagines for the future, and when he was talking about human nature and how our job should be to put humans in the conditions to be our best selves and our better angels, I was getting emotional. But how
Well, I know that,
optimistic and what a beautiful vision
okay,
that
so
was.
but you also said that you resent the idea that America, the more perfect union, blah 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 about
No,
America
I didn't
because you
say
think
anything. I think more perfect union is actually good formulation
no,
because it's progress driven.
right, but no, but you said that you don't think that we should be grateful for what we have
No,
because you
no,
think
I didn't
it's
say
like
we shouldn't be grateful. I think that sometimes a push to say you should be grateful for what you've got is anti-progress. Like it's
correct.
intentionally
That's what you
propagandistically leveraged
right,
by conservatives to derail arguments about how we can make the world
that is
more perfect.
that to me that is them stealing our heritage and letting them convince us not to adopt a very powerful
Well,
frame.
that's just an ideological difference aside, but I do
Yeah.
hear it driving your orientation. But I want Alec to have an opportunity to respond.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just jump in first. And by the way, to the extent your viewers find this useful, I'm very interested in we can continue these conversations because I think too often there's this debate between people like Lee and Matt and I think to some extent some of the people at Jacobin, for example, who I view as insufficiently informed on the evidence of public safety and insufficiently attentive to the corrosive effects of the political power that the prison industrial complex has accumulated. And I want to continue these conversations because I think it's important for people to hear them and to get really into the weeds and the specifics, because that's where it matters. Like we can debate human nature and the nation state, but like what's actually happening is people are like Li Fang is tweeting about whether Zoran Mandani should do this Department of Community Safety. And we're tweeting about actual things and they matter. And Matt, I think what I want to just put a finer point on is, some of the reforms that have happened in the last few years are good. Like getting rid of the monopoly telephone rates from the FCC was a really good thing. And it's bad that Trump's administration went back on them to allow the prison and jail telecom industry to continue extracting huge sums of money from the poorest people in our society. But you know what? Those reforms happened in spite of the Democratic Party establishment. We had to do multi-year campaigns to educate people, to push them, to organize, to create political consequences for them. That's what social movements do. Social movements build power, and then that power is traded in the political system. And so one of the most important things I've ever written is about Axon. I have an entire paper in a journal at Yale. It's actually coming out as a book as well about what I think is the most effective propaganda campaign in modern Democratic Party history, which is the police body camera. And that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. There are some reforms that are good because they reduce the size and power of the system. They give more control and autonomy and freedom to marginalized people, to working class people. And there are other reforms that actually take us further away from that goal. And that is what the body camera did. The body camera was something that Axon and other big corporate, like there was Microsoft, Amazon, there's a lot of people that are heavily invested in the police surveillance industry. And there's various monopolies actually in terms of the algorithms and the facial recognition stuff and the voice recognition stuff. But they had this dream. They wanted every police officer in the country to be outfitted with a mobile surveillance camera that the cops control. Okay? They had a problem though. They couldn't convince local governments and state governments across the country to spend billions of dollars to create this surveillance system. And so what did they do? They totally switched course. Prior to Michael Brown's killing in Ferguson, they were marketing it as something really great for prosecutors because it would help them convict poor people at higher rates than this assembly line. It's really great for police because it has incredible surveillance potential. You can go to a protest and you can scan the crowd with your body camera, and then you can connect that to facial recognition. You can see who's at the protest, who knows who. You can turn your video on or off whenever you're in the field, and you can capture whatever you want to capture. You can also take video clips, and if you want them to go viral, you can release them to the media right away, like they do whenever they have a video of some undocumented immigrant committing a crime. But if you happen to capture a video of the police killing an unarmed black teenager like Laquan McDonald, you can hide the video until Rahm Emanuel is reelected, right? So it gives them tremendous control over the public narrative. And then most importantly, they saw it as worth tens of billions of dollars to the police surveillance industry. So what they did after Michael Brown, is they convinced Democrats, led by Barack Obama, who proposed hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to local governments, to as the solution to police violence, to outfit police with body cameras. They totally changed the marketing strategy and they sold it to liberals as accountability and transparency. This was total propaganda fiction. It was something that police, you know what? The police wanted body cameras so badly that they had private foundations funded by people like Steven Spielberg that were paying for police body cameras because the government wouldn't pay for it. But they were able to convince well-meaning liberals who cared about police violence, who wanted a society with less police killing of unarmed Black teenagers and other people. They convinced those people to support the greatest expansion of monopoly police surveillance industry in modern history, and they sold it to them as a reform. And so what the defund movement was trying to do is trying to help people distinguish between when social movement energy is co-opted into reforms that increase the size and power of the system versus when those reforms actually take us closer to the kind of society that we want.
I have to say, as I'm listening to you talk about this, and I've heard you talk about this before, and I'll take your word for it. I don't know what to say, man. I mean, do a better job. Like, your frame sucks. Like, nobody takes the arguments you're making seriously because you're not attaching
Do you, Matt?
What?
Do you take his argument seriously? Do you agree with what, or is it persuasive to you what he's just said?
I don't trust you. No, I don't. I don't believe. I'd have to do my own research on this because I've heard enough things that you've said that are kind of questionable that I'm
Like
I
what?
can't take.
What's an example of
Just out
something
of
I've said that's
curiosity.
questionable?
Well, you said every single reform in the Democratic and Republican parties has been bad. And then
No, I
brought
didn't
up,
say that.
Yes, you
I didn't
did.
say that.
Yes, you
No,
did.
I said they're focused on reform. The reforms
Yes,
that they do, the criminal system, and the reforms that they push tend to be reforms that increase the size and
Now
power
you're
of the
changing,
system.
but okay, what I
But Matt, come on now. You know that the way that people talk rhetorically, sometimes you speak in an absolute when technically, yes, there's exceptions to
I mean,
every
Lee
rule.
said
So if
zero
your
working
issue
class
is that-
people support defund. I mean, that's all
Exactly.
it's hyperbole. But what I'm saying is in general, the Democratic and Republican Party establishments are proposing reforms that reify the power of the system.
I
That's what I'm
watched
saying. Do you
Minion
disagree with that?
Clyburn. I watched Minion Clyburn take on the prison phone rate thing because she thought it was important. And at the FCC, she was the FCC temporary chair, and then it got overruled by a judge. I saw, and there were social movement people that were pushing it too. But then it's okay, you're oh, the Democrats had to be forced into it. It's no, they didn't.
How do you think she found out about it? How do you think people in power find out about it?
But telling somebody, here's the thing you can do, is not the same thing as forcing them to do it. It's this fake victim narrative that's in your head, which is super weird. It's you have a lot of useful information, and why is it this whole, we're up against this impenetrable establishment that can do nothing? It's no, you're not.
Is this not the same as the analogy I made to your tweet about Clyburn and people like Clyburn embedded in the Democratic establishment who might opportunistically say that they support a good thing like economic populism, but who ideologically at their core have been forcing the Democratic Party, ushering the Democratic Party in a corporate direction since time immemorial. Part of why I wanted you to be in conversation with Alec is partly because I like you so much and I respect your work so much, but because I know that you have applied the same sort of rigor and analysis to your field that Alec has to his, and that you understand the kind of systemic forces that Alec is up against in your own realm in the way that they have co-opted to a large degree the Democratic Party.
Look, I respect Alec. I respect your work. I respect your passion. I respect your insight. I know you have a lot to say. I know that you are, you are fighting the good fight in a way, in your legal practice. You are facing just some really horrifying situations and doing incredible work there. And I respect that a lot. And I just want to make that clear. And when I say I don't take it seriously, I'm not saying that I don't take you seriously as a person or anything. What I'm saying is I think there are some fundamental ideological problems that are preventing a lot of the good information that you have from being translated into an effective political program. Right?
But I want to be clear that you're sitting here with Alec, right? So we can say, the messaging is bad and da-da-da-da, but we're talking about Alec in this conversation. It's just Alec. So, but I want to be clear that Part of my frustration is that Alec's voice in the narrative that he's advocating, which Alex Vitale and many other abolitionists do talk about, is never actually engaged with. So to the extent that there's like bad persuasion, well, they're not even invited on places to persuade mostly. It's mostly folks like Lee tweeting what he's tweeted, or people coming on my show and randomly bringing up defund with me, who's not an expert, and just yelling at me that they think the slogan that I haven't even used is wrong. So this is a test case to me in some ways of, is the messaging actually bad when you hear it? Because this is Alec doing the messaging with you. And if you find it persuasive in this context, that says to me that that's not a messaging problem. It's an audience capture problem. It's a mainstream media suppressing the narrative problem.
Can I offer like some context for how I heard defund, right? Which is that like the George Floyd, I saw there was sort of like, I exactly don't remember all of the moments, but there was sort of like there was that moment of like lunacy in like 2020 when everyone was going crazy around COVID. And like, remember all these people getting fired for saying things like, you know, I'm not into defund or whatever it is. Like there was this
not
moment of moral,
but I don't want to argue about it.
But there was this moment of moral panic in the liberal establishment where anybody that said that they don't believe in defund was, it was persona non grata. Then there was also this, dynamic where like there were riots during COVID and people were like, oh, the riots are the voices of the unheard, like that Martin Luther King quote. And I was like, this is insane, because there were like, you go to downtown DC and everyone was boarded up. And I was like, there was a real disrespect for public safety there.
I want to be clear. I lived in downtown DC. I mean, during COVID, everything was boarded up. I didn't see any riots.
No, but
so there was a preemptive,
okay, but it was
and that felt like a kind of theater too. And Alec, you've written about this kind of stuff
too. It was
too.
the largest insurance. It was the largest insurance losses in American history. Those riots. I don't know if they were in DC, but they were all over the country.
What riots? I wish to just
I can
go
send
on
you the
long
insurance
walks through
claims.
Georgetown.
Like there were billions of
during
dollars
COVID.
Okay, so this is a good example. There were riots. They were reported on nationwide. There were billions of dollars of damage. There were a lot of small business owners that got harmed. And now where you're saying what riots? It's like there were riots. There were.
No, but
like that's a bad thing.
I'm making a very specific claim. No, Matt, you said that the buildings were boarded up in response to riots. I'm simply pointing out that the buildings were boarded up as part of a political theater that had nothing to do with the riots. That didn't exist in the... Wait a minute. That didn't exist... Sorry, you were just coughing. I thought you were interrupting. That didn't exist in the places where the boards were put up. In part, the same way, I'm sure you've been following that. All of the theater around the CVSs are getting robbed all the time, and that's why they're closing down. I'm not saying that some CVSs aren't getting robbed somewhere,
fine.
But it's being used as a justification.
I'm not an expert on the why which stores were boarded up and why, but I can tell you that it was pretty surprising to me to read that it was the largest insurance loss event in American history, or one of the largest insurance loss events. Maybe not, maybe there were natural disasters that were larger. And it was like, there were a lot of people that lost a lot of property. And what I'm saying is the liberals and the left and the defund people were all contemptuous of the idea that there were even riots. And so to say that this like, you got to listen to what they really say. Like, I listened, I heard it loud and clear. And it was not a good message. It was a message that was deeply contemptuous of public safety. And it was also a message that said, if you are concerned about public safety, fuck you. And that was very clear. It was like loud and clear, fuck you, we hate you, if you care about public safety. And like, you can't get away from that. And like, that's just the truth. If you don't deal with that, and I don't, no, it's not my truth. It is a truth that I think if you do focus groups and polling, you will find that Americans kind of across the board sort of feel that way. And I maybe that was propagandized. I don't know. I don't agree with that, because I saw the defund people do it directly. But I'm just saying that is a problem. That context existed. That was real. And you can't avoid it. And if you just want to pretend like it didn't happen,
let's ask the author of Propaganda. What do you say about all that?
I know we're way over time, so I think we should... There's a lot that's been said in the last few minutes that I think deserves discussion and response, so we should do it another time. I have a very different view of the last few years that Matt does, and maybe that actually is its own conversation that's worth having. I just want to end on like a couple of just really salient points for me. In none of my attempts to talk to people like Lee, or even here today with Matt, am I seeing any engagement with or pushback on the idea that more investment in police prosecution and prisons is what's needed for public safety. That's good because the empirical evidence is so overwhelming to the contrary. And what's so striking to me is in none of these debates do those people who are saying that. I can't even, when I wrote this, my last book, I was invited on to all these, NPR morning edition and all, I went on the Daily Show, a few years ago. Like, nobody will talk to me right now in the mainstream corporate media without extreme badgering, and even those people do it reluctantly, about they just don't want to have this conversation. And I can't even get people like Lee to engage with the basic evidence. And if a journalist like that did that with respect to climate or any other issue, it would be shocking. But on this issue, people are just unwilling to engage with the empirical evidence, which is that investments in the material well-being of working class people are the best investment for improving public safety. That's just a fact. And all of these conversations are a distraction. All of this talk about defund people not caring about public safety, it couldn't be further from the truth. And it's all premised on a lie. It's all premised on the lie that advocating different investments in public safety means you don't care about public safety. I care so deeply about public safety because so many people I love have been harmed in our society. That's why I do this work. And it almost feels like I'm in a twilight zone when I'm online. I'm having these conversations because nobody will engage with the fact that the earth is warming, the fact that investments in the systems of support and care, housing, healthcare, education, et cetera, are the way to public safety. And it's like, because we're not having that conversation, the Democratic Party is missing out on an incredibly important and popular opportunity to promote public safety through policies that are very popular. And that's the thing that I just don't think.
I think you're kind of banging your head against a wall, because what you're saying is when we talk in terms of issues, and policing is one issue, and you're saying, you're just basically saying we need more of all of this other stuff, which of course, we all agree. That's why I'm kind of a progressive, and that's why I'm a Democrat, because I want a more equal society. I want a less atomized, less lonely society. We want more spending on the things that matter, and not necessarily more spending, but more effective resources dedicated to it. I don't think you're going to find disagreement there, because we all agree on that. But I think the narrow question of policing,
less spending on the police.
And that's propaganda. That's the whole propaganda, is telling people like you that those issues are separate from policing. They're all related. The levels of harm and violence and safety in our society are directly related to healthcare.
No, I'm not. I don't. That's not the argument. The argument is just you have a police budget and you have a housing budget. You don't combine them. But the fact
but Matt, there are city budgets in the police department. What is 50% of the LA city budget? It's almost 50% of the New York City budget. And there are trade-offs. Mayor Adams closed down the library and funded the police more. This is unfortunately, in these municipal contexts, a zero-sum game of sorts. And so the whole point of defund, if you prefer reallocation of resources, those things are directly connected.
They're not. It's not a choice of whether to fund. Look, first of all, you don't have to pay Axon $600. I got a $600,000 a year for, they just converted to a subscription service, and so the amount, the monopolization that they're engaging in, there's the graft and corruption that's going on in the prison industrial complex. The bloat is significant, and I don't think you're going to see.
So we should defund it. Should we cut funding to the police?
You shouldn't cut funding. What you should do is you should get a better deal. You should get the same stuff.
So less money is going to the police.
No, less money is going to Axon. More money could be going to the actual officers to solve crimes and things like that. The point is that
okay.
You're trying to get me to say
it's not your fault. It's not your fault. I'm just saying Alec has to go. He had a hard stop 15 minutes ago, so I want to be respectful of his time and let him go.
It would be worth us having a separate conversation, though, on the sort of other issue that we talked about, which is that when you invest so much money in the repressive bureaucracy of the state, and you expand its capacity to surveil people, to infiltrate social movements, to crush working class movements, the reason I started earlier in the conversation by saying that the police have been a central role from J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, before that, after that, in crushing the very political movements that brought us all these good things that we're talking about. It's not just that there's a zero-sum municipal budget. It's that the police actually are a political force.
Yes.
And the companies that support the policing bureaucracy are political forces that influence policy and distort democracy.
It feels like saying let's reform the Democratic Party, but let's not do anything about campaign finance.
Look,
like, sure, but they're going to buy all the elections anyway. You have to get at the root of the evil.
I don't think there's any problem here saying reform the police and reform our public safety infrastructure. I think that is 100% like an important thing to do. I don't think we would have had a debate if that was the basic frame here. But like, it was defund the police. It was defund the police at a very specific moment in which like disdain for public safety was a big part of the sort of liberal lefty messaging. And like, that was a real thing. And I think we have to deal with that. But like, ultimately, a reform the police model with stakeholders inside the police who know it's not working well, who want it to be better. It is a classic, every bureaucracy has this classic problem. Like,
you sound like someone saying we should reform the fossil fuel monopolies by trusting the people inside Exxon. There's a structural analysis here.
I don't understand why you think that. Like, first of all,
you just said that we should give more money to the police as the reform.
I didn't say that. I don't know where you're getting that. I said,
you said take away the money from Axon's contract.
If you think
you said take Axon's money and give it more to the police, they can solve crimes.
No, I said you said where are we going to get more resources?
He said it's possible that there could be more money going into the police if you got rid of Axon.
You said take it from the police, and I don't think that money going to Axon is money going to the police.
It's like an ideological commitment to not defunding the police. Well, you should if there's bloat and waste in any part of government, like I'm not ideologically committed to growing government every year for just no reason.
I think that there's a ton of bloat in
but not in the police.
Well, there's obviously going to be a ton of bloat in the police.
Okay, so if there's bloat in the police, should you defund the police budget?
No, you should do budgeting for what you think you need. I mean, does that mean?
Alec,
let's pick it up there later.
You're trying to trap me in some sort of. I don't
really
know. Every
not.
city has different needs. Every city has different budgets.
Alec, we gotta let Alec go.
I just want to make one point about Eric Adams.
You can stay, Matt. You can stay. But I need to let Alec go. Alec, can you just tell people where to find you in your book on the internet and beyond so I can release you? Sorry, I'm really sorry
and to be clear, I'd love to continue this conversation. I'm just really late for a meeting that is actually trying to tackle the prison and telecom industry. So
you go to that.
But yeah, I'll go to that. And anytime you all want to talk again, I think we're getting somewhere. And I think we can, the further we dig in, the more we can, and I think it's going to be useful for people who are having these tensions in their own head. So people can find the book at Propaganda. All the royalties go to an amazing organization that fights against police surveillance. I don't get any royalties from the book. I encourage you to check it out, and you can really see how I walk through the arguments maybe a little bit better if you take a look at the book. So Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and Brianna for bringing us together. And I'm so sorry that I got to run to this meeting.
Not at all. And let's continue this conversation. I really appreciated you both. See you soon. See you later, Alec.
Bye.
All right.
Matt, you get the last word.
Well, I just want to say, I think if we're talking about trade-offs, I don't think the trade-off is between spending on housing and spending on police. I think the trade-off for Eric Adams was spending on anything and giving it to the real estate industry. So I just want to be clear about that. Like, to me, this is just about Wall Street extracting versus spending on social priorities. And I lump policing in with social priorities. And you can, change the amount if you want to. But like, basically, we need a safe society with adequate housing and nutrition and all the rest of the nice stuff. I don't think we're doing a good job of that. And I think we should do a good job of that. I just feel like when I look at something like Axon or any of these bloated monopolies, like that's Wall Street. That's not going to the cops, right? So,
okay, I'm gonna bite my tongue and wrap this conversation. But I really do. I think Alec really means it in good faith when he says he wants to continue it. I think maybe we can do it in the context of a live stream where it's more open-ended, and we can also take comments from the audience. Many
that'd be
people
fun.
who I know, really do resonate with your side of things, Matt.
let me
I think
see
it's very productive. And maybe Lee also, I've invited him on to talk to Alec in the past. I think that he might have felt, not wanting to get ganged up on or what have you. Maybe this conversation is a model for him. Who hates Lee?
Alec.
Alec, no, I don't think it's about that. I mean, given the work that Alec is doing that is so important and so well researched and so knowledge, but like fact-based, empirical, I think I can understand why it would be so frustrating to have someone who had very strong opinions and made them very loudly, but was unwilling to engage in any of the research behind it. And so I would like, if you think it's an unfair mischaracterization, Lee, I invite you to come on.
Well, you should have Lee on, because I'm not going to, I do think it's an unfair characterization. I do think, I just put in the chat, the insurance, story about the insurance from the riots. And
and I will say this, the reason that I don't even, I'll read your link, but the reason that I am not especially compelled by engaging in that is, one, again, if you read propaganda, the whole point is about how these kinds of news media stories are used to distract the public from the core issue that made everybody go so crazy, as you put it, Matt, which is that we all watched a man get strangled to death for 7 minutes on camera. We all watched that. And that was why people went so crazy, because they saw an agent of the state do an online murder.
Yeah.
That was all but live streamed, and we all got to witness that. And it was a reckoning for folks about the impunity with which the police operate in the United States of America. And it wasn't crazy. It wasn't unmoored. It wasn't from nothing.
I know, but I think
it was accumulation of a movement where we had seen little boys in Cleveland, where I sit, shot in the playground with 7 seconds of contact with the police. And
have you had any police on to talk about this? Because that video had a big impact on the police too. There's a lot of police that don't kill people, and they probably didn't like it either.
So, Matt, that's why I'm not especially persuaded by, the Apple Store being boarded up in Georgetown or what have you. But all that being said, I really do appreciate you joining and being willing to spend so much time and being such a good sport about this. And maybe we'll have you, and maybe Lee would be more willing to come on the show if you were there with him, and there was a little bit more balance, because obviously I am inclined to side.
I always appreciate
Alec
you.
Here.
You're a good sport. You allow me to spout off, and I've seen you multiple times being like, I'm going to take a step back.
It feels good to be seen, Matt. It feels good to be seen. Tell the people where to find more of you and your amazing anti-monopoly work.
I just want to sit with that and just extend my respect, because it happened. I don't want to say more than once. It happened many times in this conversation. So I will say, in my defense, it was 2-on-1. So there was a little bit of that.
And that's completely right and fair. This is what I'm saying. I would be more than happy to have you back with Lee, because I'm an amateur and Lee's an amateur. And Alex is an expert, and sure, but I don't know how to get the balance exactly right.
Yeah,
I don't know what a pro, I guess that is the cop in your imagining to go head to head with.
No. I actually just met a police officer. I'm actually I've talked to police about it, and some of them quit, and they were like, yeah, it was. People I met who were doing other things, I was talk to them. They were like, I used to be a cop, and then it just got too difficult because everybody hated us or whatever it was. And, it was just, it really had this fascinating impact inside police forces. And I just think that's kind of an underexplored area. Because when I deal with institutional reform, and I'm not talking about police, I'm talking about antitrusty type of stuff, or bureau regulator type of stuff. The actual psychology of the people inside the institutions is very weird and interesting. So that's an area I don't see discussed. And I know there is actually a lot of work on the left with police directly. So it's something that I think is something I'd like to see more of.
Sure. Well, whoever the panel ends up being, you're going to be one of my first calls, Matt. Thank you again. And can you tell folks where to find more about your work in the anti-monopoly sphere and elsewhere on the internet?
If you want to know how we're defeating all the monopolies, I'm at thebignewsletter.com. I also write too much on Twitter at Matthew Stoller. at Matthew Stoller. And then I'm at a think tank, but we won't tar them with what I said on this podcast, because this was just me freelancing while I have the flu on things I don't know anything about. But yeah, that's what I do. If you want to understand why Google runs everything and how nice the world that Google is giving us will be, you can read me there. I also have a book, Goliath: The 100-Year War Between Monopoly, Power, and Democracy.
All right, amazing. You've made me want to now just do a whole other episode with you around your area of expertise, because you reminded me of all these questions I actually have been having about that. But again, we're just going to have you back on the podcast at some future date. Thank you again for all your time. And please do feel better, and happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.
All right. Take care. Thanks for all of you for tuning in. As always, you can get an extra episode of Bad Faith Podcast every Monday at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. Thanks for listening. And as always, keep the faith. Hey, YouTube. Thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.